This is a wedging board, and I have wedging boards of all different sizes. These are actually over in the shelves over there by where Tyler sits, kind of at the front. There's one shelf that has these. At the end of class, you have to make sure and wipe these off with a damp sponge. Even if you don't think it looks dirty, a lot of times a lot of residue is left on here, and it has to be wiped off so that the next class can use them. You can use a couple of them if you need to, like if you want to have one to make stuff and then one to set your pieces on. This is a kind of like a Lazy Susan. I can't remember what they're actually called, but this is kind of helpful if you're building like a coil pot and you want to have it set on here while you're adding the coils. It'll kind of turn, which can be kind of helpful, and you can combine these two things to make it more stable. And this you can just take back to your table. If a lot of kids want to use these, I have more. I just have a couple out to show you. This is a wire tool that you could take back to your table. Sorry if this is review for some of you, because I know some of you guys have done this before. So let's say that I'm going to go get my clay out and I'm ready to start working with it. What's the first thing I'm going to do to it? Wedge it. So again, to wedge, you press down and in at the same time, and this takes a little bit of arm strength. Sometimes I get out of breath whenever I do it. And I also like to tell kids that I like to be at a surface where I can actually press down with my shoulders, so the taller tables don't really work well for wedging because it's hard to get above them and get the right pressure. And you want to do that several times to do what? What am I doing? Pop in those air bubbles. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do is make, well, I guess we'll start with a slab, okay? So whenever I make a slab of clay, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll kind of pat it down into kind of like a round shape, and I pick it up and flip it over a few times so it doesn't get stuck, because if it gets stuck, that can be very annoying to get off. Okay, now let's say I want to make a slab. I need these two dowel rods. These are 3/4 of an inch thick, and I know that because I put a little black spot on the end of them, just so I could keep the same color, like color coded. So those are that size, and I need a rolling pin. And what I'm going to do, and this is just like rolling out a pie crust, is I'm going to start to roll the clay using firm pressure, and this also pops air bubbles too, by the way. And I'm going to pick up the clay and turn it and flip it over and roll it another direction. Clay has a memory, and if you're rolling it out and you don't flip it and turn it, sometimes it will retain the memory of the initial shape that you had it in before you rolled it out, and it'll make it break later, which seems kind of like a weird thing, but like I said, there's things on clay that you have to do, and if you don't do them, it messes it up later on. And so I want to show you the right way to do it, so that way you guys will start out right. Okay, so I'm rolling this out, and let's say I want to cut out a shape like a square for a slab construction. I have a pink square somewhere that I already made. Oh, it's right up there by the lace. Do you see that pink paper up there? Destiny, will you grab me that pink piece? There you go, that whole stack, that's fine. Okay, so let's say I'm going to make a cube. I would make a template, set it on there, and then I would use some type of a tool. You could either use a needle tool or a pencil to do this. I would just trace around that. So templates can be very good. If you want to make a sculpture and you want it to have a certain size base, you can start with a template. If I were going to make a cube, how many of these squares would I need? 6. I would need 6 of them. Now, anytime you make something like this, you have to be careful when you go to pick it up, because if you just grab it by the corner and pull on it, you could make it kind of deformed on that corner, and then it'll never really be square again. So you want to kind of baby these things, right? I've had kids, they'll spend all this time making them, and then when they pick it up, they'll set it down onto the edge of something, and it'll get this big crease in it. So whenever I say be careful, I mean be careful not to get any of your edges messed up. Really take your care, and that'll save you a lot of time later on so you won't have to remake something. I have this is kind of new this year. It's kind of cool. Let's say I have all 6 of these walls made, and I want to put this together into a cube. I can go along the edge and make it have a beveled edge. Have you heard of that word, bevel? Bevel means kind of at an angle. So there's a little wire on there. And if I had more made and they're leather hard, I could go ahead and put those on. I don't have any more made, but that's how you make a basic slab, okay? Your slab could be a base that you add stuff on. It could be something that you make multiples of, like I said before, and make it into a cube. I've had kids make like a little slice of pie that way before, okay? Like a sculpture of food would be kind of cool. All right, so now what's the next thing I should make? Coil? Okay, so if I'm going to make a coil, I'm going to get a chunk of clay, And I'm gonna kind of start by just kind of rolling it in my hands, and then I'm gonna roll it on the table. Now, sometimes what'll happen whenever you're rolling out a coil is if you're not giving the right amount of even pressure on the whole thing, it'll get all flip, 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 okay? And it'll get really kind of like flat on like two sides. So you wanna just take your time, move the coil in your palms, give it even pressure, and start rolling it out. Now, as it gets longer, if it gets longer than your wedging board, you may have to move it over to the table to do this, because sometimes what'll happen then is it will get this weird little end on it because it's rolling against the edge of your wedging board. So you just want to be careful of that and make sure that doesn't happen. Let's say that I've already made a bunch of coils and I'm ready to turn them into a coil pot. I'm going to make a base by just kind of flattening this down. Another way sometimes I'll make a slab is to throw it against the table like this, if I just need like something flattened and I don't want to get the rolling pins out. This takes a little bit of skill though, because it can kind of go flying on you. But that's another way that you can get a nice flat even piece, is to just flip it over and throw it against the table in the direction you want. So let's say that this is my slab that I'm going to use for my coil vase. You might want to grab something round to trace around, and it could be a container or a circle tracer or whatever. And you could trace it, and then if you're ready to start coiling on top of that, I always pick it up and make sure that it's not stuck down. Sometimes that happens. Is I would go ahead and put this on here and get it started. Now, if this has been sitting here for a while, so it might be a little bit dry. If yours is pretty green, you may not have to do the step that's called scoring and slipping. Have you heard of that step before? Mm-hmm. Okay, so scoring and slipping, I said this earlier, slip is a container that's full of this watered down clay glue, and I like to apply it with just like kind of like a toothbrush, because it kind of scratches the clay and saves me a little bit of a step later on of scoring. So it's going to moisturize and scratch the clay at the same time. It's going to itch its back. I don't know why I just thought of that, but I did. Okay, so now I'm going to start to wrap this coil around here. And then what I always do whenever I'm going to make a coil vase, before I cut this off or before I add the next coil on, is I'll kind of cut it at a little bit of an angle, so that when I put the next one on, it can connect at that same angle and it looks like one continuous piece. Now, if you're going to do something out of coil, raise your hand if you've done coil pots before in the past. Some of you guys have, some of you haven't. It can be helpful if you do something called luting. Luting the clay is where you drag the clay and actually on the inside of the pot make it all one thing inside there. And this is a good tool for that. This is a rib tool, I think is what it's called. I can't remember if that's the right word, but I think it is. Metal rib. I have some rubber ones, plastic ones, wood ones. I have all different ones, but I like the metal one for luting the clay. It's kind of hard to see this, but I'm basically just dragging the clay on the inside to make it all one piece inside there so that the coils don't fall off. Now there's a lot of things you can do with coils. You can use coil to make handles on things. You can use a coil to make details on a sculpture. Okay, so coils are helpful, so everybody probably will end up using a coil at some point. All right, so the last step, the last method of forming clay is what?
Pinch pot.
Pinch pot. Okay, so I'm going to start with just a small piece. Here's how I start with a pinch pot, and I'm going to show this to everybody, and then you'll all know forever. I roll it in a ball in my hands like this. If you roll it on the table, sometimes it'll get flat. It'll turn into like a dreidel, and it'll look like it's a spinning top. But if you roll it in your palms, and people have been making clay like this for thousands of years. I mean, people figured this out, how to take something out of the earth and turn it into a vessel, and they figured out what temperatures work best for firing it. So it's pretty cool that we're still using these same methods to make things out of clay. So pinch pot, here's how I even showed my baby kindergartners this. You hold the pot in your hand, start with your thumb, press it into the middle of the clay, and then you pinch, 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 and turn it all the way around. Pinch pots are good for making a shape that is going to have like a round base on the bottom, because you can get it smooth on the outside. You just want to take your time and make sure that there's an even thickness all the way around, because if you're not taking your time to do this, it'll sometimes get a little bit wonky on one side, it'll get too tall on one side, there's all kinds of things that can go wrong. Okay, I'm going to keep working on this one, but there was one more thing I wanted to show you. If you wanted to make a slab and drape it over a bowl. That could also be an option too for some of you. So I'm just gonna throw this slab out instead of rolling it out. And then let's say I have a ton of these bowls. Let's say you wanted it to be this size. You could roll it out big enough to drape over that, and you could just lay some wet paper towels in between the clay and the bowl, and then you could actually drape it on there, and that could be where you start out. And a lot of kids do it that way. And sometimes they'll do a draped bowl like that. They'll let it sit and become leather hard, and then they'll do coils and make it taller, or they'll turn it into a vase or something like that too. So if that's how you want to start out, that's always an option. I'm going to keep throwing this. As you can tell, it's hard to do and talk at the same time. So the other way would be to roll it out with a rolling pin. I kind of like this method. Okay, so that's what draping would look like. And you would just want to make sure it's on there, put in wet paper towel in between, and then you could let that sit and cut it off and make it the right size. Okay, that's the last thing I was going to show you over here as far as forming the clay. Any questions about any of that? Okay, yes ma'am.
On the wires, how do you want us to go about cutting when they're not connected to anything?
Let me show you that. That's a good question. So let's say I have a bigger chunk than this. I don't think I would use a wire to cut this. I would just tear it, but just for the sake of showing you what to do. Let's say I want to cut this in half. You just take the wire, you pull it through the clay, and it cuts it. It's kind of a satisfying feeling too, because you're like, I just did that like butter. You know, and cuts it like butter. You know what I'm saying? Okay, behind you on that table, there are some examples of some sculptures. You might want to take a look at them. Think about how they were made. Think about if you can figure out if they were wheel thrown, if they were slab, if they were coil, or if they were pinch pot. Walk by that table and talk about it to a friend before you sit down. Okay? Thank you.